My name is Rowan Kane. I'm 27 years old. And just 1 month ago, at my brother's 31st birthday party, I watched 2 full decades of being treated like background noise collapse in one single sentence. We were gathered in the backyard of my parents' house in a quiet suburb outside Baltimore. The grill was fired up, smoke curling into the warm evening air. String lights shimmered overhead, while more than 2 dozen of my brother's friends laughed loudly, passing cold beers from hand to hand. From the outside, it looked like the picture-perfect family gathering, lively, close-knit, full of smiles and easy conversation. My mom stayed glued to my brother's side, refilling his drink before he even had to ask. My dad kept clapping him on the back every time he launched into another story about his next big idea. Even my cousin stood right there in the circle, nodding enthusiastically, as if every word he said was pure gold. And then, there was me. I sat off to the side exactly where I'd always been. I quietly picked at the food on my plate, eating just enough to look polite, listening to laughter that never included me. I'd grown used to that feeling over the years, the feeling of being invisible in my own family. Then my brother turned toward me. He wore the same smug grin he'd had since we were kids, the one he always used when he wanted to belittle me in front of others. He spoke with open mockery in his voice. "So you're still wasting your time on that little clothing thing of yours?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look up right away. I simply shrugged, calm and casual, as if we were talking about nothing important at all. "Actually, I just sold my shares in the company." The noise in the backyard continued for a brief second, as if no one had fully registered what I'd said. Then my brother let out a short, dismissive laugh. "That worthless little project," he said. "Sure. How much did you get enough to buy yourself a new wardrobe?" That was when I finally looked up. I met his eyes directly. No hesitation, no anger, no need to prove anything. And I said slowly and clearly, $260 million. Everything stopped. My father's face drained of color in an instant. He was holding a beer, and his hand began to shake so violently that he had to grab the edge of the picnic table to steady himself, as if his legs might give out beneath him. My brother's mouth fell open, all the color disappearing from his face, until he looked physically ill. My mother dropped the paper plate she was holding, ribs and coleslaw spilling onto the grass, and just stared at me like she was seeing a stranger for the first time. Even my cousin froze her eyes wide, completely speechless. In that single frozen moment, every memory came rushing back. Every time they had brushed me aside. Every time they had poured all their attention, expectations, and resources into him while leaving me with nothing. Every quiet dinner, every overlooked achievement, every unspoken reminder that I didn't matter as much. But this time, something was different. For the first time, the weight of all those years wasn't pressing down on me anymore. The shock, the disbelief, the realization, it all landed squarely on them instead. I stood there calm and steady while their carefully built assumptions shattered right in front of them. If you want to know how the daughter they always overlooked ended up casually dropping a $260 million truth at her brother's birthday party, and what happened next to the family that spent years betting on the wrong child, stay with me until the very end. If this story made you pause for a moment, if you felt the pain, the injustice, and the things that were never spoken, please leave a comment and let me know how it made you feel. And don't forget to subscribe. Every subscription is a quiet form of support, helping these stories continue to be told and allowing the truth behind them to be fully heard. May the stories I share find the hearts that truly need to listen. Thank you so much. I love you all. Growing up in that quiet neighborhood outside Baltimore, I learned early on that our house had only one son, and his name was Spencer. He was 4 years older than me. And from the very moment I began forming memories, everything in this family revolved around him. I wasn't just the younger sibling. I was the shadow, the silence that lingered behind every time the spotlight shone straight on him. My earliest memories aren't of my own laughter, but of watching the entire world come to a halt for Spencer. His 31st birthday was a real event, a backyard celebration so grand it felt like it took over the whole neighborhood. A massive bounce house swallowed half the lawn, a three-tier birthday cake decorated with the logo of his favorite hockey team, every line of icing sharp and perfect. Neighbors showed up. Kids from his private school ran around screaming and laughing as if this were the most important day of the year. My dad stood by the grill flipping meat with undisguised pride on his face. My mom rushed back and forth, checking every tiny detail, making sure Spencer had everything he wanted and more. They even hired someone in a mascot costume to entertain the crowd. I stood off at the edge of the party wearing a hand-me-down dress that didn't quite fit, both hands wrapped tightly around a juice box. I watched everyone clap and cheer as Spencer leaned forward to blow out the candles. The applause was loud and relentless, as if the entire world was officially acknowledging him. The feeling was painfully clear. The whole world was celebrating Spencer, and I was just standing there watching. My birthday that year came 1 month later. No bounce house, no crowd, no gathering at all. Just a square cake picked up in a hurry from the grocery store, a few crooked candles stuck into the top. My mom set it down and apologized, saying she was still exhausted from planning Spencer's party. I opened a few small gifts, mostly clothes I already needed, and we sang the birthday song quickly like a task that needed to be checked off and finished. No one took pictures. No one remembered it for long. And the moment passed so lightly it hurt. And that never changed. I remember Spencer's 10th birthday clearly. He got a brand new mountain bike, bright red, gleaming, loaded with gears I didn't even understand. My dad ran alongside him as he rode up and down the street, neighbors watching and clapping. My mom kept saying how far he was going to go, how he was born to shine. That bike wasn't just a gift, it was a statement. On my 10th birthday, I received a used board game and a few books bought from a library fair. There was no applause. No camera. No one telling me I was going to go far. School only made everything clearer and crueler. Spencer attended the best private school in the area. Crisp uniforms. Small class sizes. Coaches already keeping an eye on him for youth hockey leagues. My mom fought to get him accepted, drove him to school every morning, and never missed a single parent meeting. My dad wrote checks without hesitation. Piano lessons. Expensive sports camps. Every dollar spent on Spencer came with pride. When I asked why I couldn't have the same opportunities, my mom smiled, gentle but firm, and said, "Spencer has real potential. He needs the investment. You're smart, you'll figure things out on your own." So I did. I took public buses to a middle school 3 miles from home. My backpack weighed down with old textbooks. No extracurricular activities. No one to pick me up. No money for fees. I studied at the library until it closed, then walked home quietly. Then my cousin Indy started showing up more often. Only a few years older than Spencer, she was quickly pulled into his orbit. My mom took the two of them out for ice cream or movies, calling back to me, "I'll bring you something." Indy always received little extras, new clothes, concert tickets, because she was practically family. I didn't hate Indy, but watching the world revolve around them while I was left behind hurt sharply. Dinner conversations were always the same. Spencer talked. Mom asked questions. Dad listened. If I opened my mouth to mention a good grade or something I was proud of, the conversation immediately drifted back to Spencer. And I understood something then. My silence was more comfortable than my presence. By the time I was 12, I stopped asking for anything. I did odd jobs, babysat, mowed lawns. Every dollar I earned went into a jar hidden in my closet, the only thing in that house that truly belonged to me. None of those things broke me. They shaped me. Every forgotten birthday. Every excuse. Every time they chose him without hesitation, I stored it all away. Not to cry over it, but to remember. To remember that if I wanted anything in this life, I would have to build it with my own hands. The favoritism was never loud, never openly cruel. It was quiet, constant, as natural to them as breathing, and it taught me one brutal, invaluable lesson: how to survive without needing their air. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped running to them with my report cards in my hands. Not because my grades had slipped, but because I already knew exactly how the scene would play out. I would place the paper with an A in math or English on the kitchen counter. Mom would glance at it just long enough to say, "That's good." Then her attention would immediately drift to Spencer, his latest hockey practice, whether a coach had called yet. Dad wouldn't even look up from his phone. He'd nod, distracted. That was always where it ended. No praise, no follow-up, no pause long enough for me to exist. So I learned to stay quiet. I learned to keep my accomplishments in the only place they were safe: inside myself. And I focused on the one thing I truly controlled: me. The summer I turned 15, I got a part-time job at a small clothing boutique downtown. Minimum wage, folding shirts, hanging racks, sweeping floors, smiling at customers who would never remember my name. There was nothing glamorous about it, but the money was mine, every single dollar. I saved my tips for weeks and bought a used laptop from a classmate's older brother. It was slow. The screen was scratched. The fan sounded like it might die at any moment, but it could run basic design software. And to me, that meant everything. After every shift, when the house had gone quiet, I sat on my bed and taught myself YouTube tutorials, graphic design, pattern drafting, fabric types, composition, proportions. I sketched in cheap notebooks I bought on sale. At first, my lines were clumsy, my ideas scattered, but slowly, piece by piece, things began to fit together like fragments finding their place. No one at home noticed I was coming back later. No one asked why my clothes smelled like fabric softener. Every conversation still revolved around Spencer. His game started attracting scouts. Mom paid for SAT prep courses without hesitation. Dad talked about him with pride, as if Spencer's future belonged to the entire family. When Spencer received early acceptance to a top out-of-state university, the house exploded into celebration. They threw a party, invited relatives, hung a banner in the living room. Mom cried as she talked about his bright future. I applied to the University of Maryland alone late at night, sitting in front of my laptop. I filled out financial aid forms by myself. I chased scholarships on my own, and I earned a partial scholarship in business and design. When the acceptance letter arrived, I printed it out and left it on the kitchen counter. Mom saw it, smiled quickly, and said, "That's nice, Rowan." Then she turned back to helping Spencer prepare for his campus visit, the one where both Mom and Dad flew with him, toured dorms, met coaches, and took photos. My move-in day looked nothing like that. I took a bus to campus with 2 duffel bags and a box of thrift store bedding. The dorm room was cramped, 3 people squeezed into one space, walls thin enough to hear every cough and argument next door. My scholarship covered tuition, but nothing else. Books, rent, food, I handled those myself. I picked up early morning shifts at a campus cafe. At 6 a.m., I steamed milk, pulled espresso shots, wiped counters while half asleep. Then I rushed to class with coffee stains on my shirt and shaking hands from exhaustion. I was tired, alone. But this was the path I had chosen. Between classes, I disappeared into the library with my battered laptop. I kept learning, kept experimenting. One night, a roommate complained about fast fashion clothes, how they fell apart after one wash, seams unraveling fabric thin enough to see through. "In the end, it's all just trash," she said. That sentence hit me like a jolt. I started researching sustainable fabrics, recycled materials, ethical production. I wasn't thinking about getting rich. I was thinking, if there's a better way, why not try? That's how Evergreen Threads was born. At first, it was barely visible. Almost nothing. I borrowed a sewing machine and worked in the dorm laundry room at night, stitching prototypes from leftover fabric. T-shirts, hoodies, neutral colors, clean lines, No logos, no noise, just clothes made to last longer than one season. I opened an Etsy shop over a weekend, took photos with my phone against a white sheet taped to the wall, wrote every product description myself. A month later, the first order came through a gray crew neck. The buyer left a review saying it felt better than clothes twice the price. Money wasn't what kept me awake that night. Proof was. I reinvested every dollar. Better thread, better fabric. Friends started asking for custom pieces. Someone posted a photo online. Then a few more orders followed, slow, steady reel. No backing, no safety net. Just me and the work. That Thanksgiving, I went home for a few days. At dinner, I tried mentioning the shop. Told them about the first 50 orders. About customer messages. Mom nodded and said, "Sounds like a little hobby." Then she shifted the conversation to Spencer's fraternity party, to how Dad had sent extra money for his new apartment. Spencer never looked up from his phone. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I went back to campus early and kept working. Small victories began to stack up. A repeat customer. A thank you message. 100 orders. No applause. No pride. No acknowledgement. But every single one of them was mine. And for the first time in my life, that was enough to keep me standing. I graduated earlier than most people, not because I was ahead, but because I couldn't afford to slow down. Every semester, I overloaded my schedule, stacking extra credits, until the weeks blurred together and days lost their names. I didn't have the luxury of stretching time. Every additional month in school meant another month stuck in place. Another month I wasn't allowed to step forward and build something that actually belonged to me. When I walked across the stage, my graduation cap sat slightly crooked. My name echoed through a crowded hall, and yet the feeling inside me was hollow. No one from home was there. That morning, Mom had sent a short text. They couldn't make it. They needed to help Spencer move into his new off-campus house. New lease, new furniture, a fresh start for him. I stared at the message longer than I expected. I didn't feel angry. I wasn't surprised. It was simply a cold confirmation of what I had known for years. I didn't respond. After the ceremony, while other graduates stood wrapped in family arms smiling into cameras, I went back to my cramped apartment. I opened my laptop. No champagne, no flowers, no celebration photos. I typed into the search bar "office space" for rent. That was the moment I chose myself again. The unit I found sat inside a building no one ever noticed near downtown Baltimore. Peeling walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed like they were seconds from dying. One narrow window overlooking a cracked parking lot. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't warm. But the rent was low, and more importantly, it was mine. I signed the lease using savings scraped together from years of side jobs and early sales, dollar by dollar. My hand didn't shake, but my chest felt tight, like I was stepping into a gamble with no exit. I moved in with almost nothing: a second-hand desk, a flimsy folding chair, and boxes of fabric samples stacked against the wall. The moment that door closed behind me, evergreen threads stopped being an idea. It became a living thing. I incorporated the business, built a real website, streamlined production with a local seamstress working from her home, a quiet, meticulous woman who understood what it meant to work without applause. Orders didn't explode, but they came steadily, consistently, without drama. Customers started leaving specific feedback. The clothes didn't warp after repeated washes. The seams held. The fabric felt good and felt right. They didn't feel guilty buying more. No waste, no shortcuts. I taught myself digital marketing through free courses, squeezing lessons into breaks that barely existed. I reached out to micro-influencers, sending samples to people who cared about sustainability more than follower counts. When they posted, sales crept upward, then spiked. One feature on a mid-sized eco-blog brought in hundreds of orders overnight. At first, I did everything alone. I packed orders on the floor, printed labels after midnight, drove to the post office when the streets were empty, my trunk full of boxes and a deep bone-level exhaustion riding with me. Then the numbers shifted. Monthly revenue crossed 5 figures and stayed there. I hired my first employee, a recent graduate desperate for someone to believe in them. We worked side by side in that cramped room, laptops nearly touching eating takeout over spreadsheets and sketches. We expanded carefully: pants, outerwear, more colors, never breaking the core promise, never trading values for speed. When a regional boutique chain reached out about wholesale, I negotiated late into the night. My heart pounded as I signed the contract. Inventory sold out faster than I could replace it. I opened a small showroom attached to the office: white walls, simple racks, a fitting room barely large enough to turn around in. Customers began coming in person, touching the fabric, nodding, buying. Then the first serious offer arrived: a massive apparel conglomerate, $80 million, glass conference rooms, lawyers, polished smiles, a number big enough to change everything. But buried in the fine print was the cost: overseas production, cheaper materials, sustainability reduced to a marketing slogan. Everything I had built flattened into margins. I said no. My team was terrified. I wasn't. The decision was frightening and right. That refusal put us on new radars. Venture firms focused on ethical consumer brands started calling. I chose carefully. I walked away from offers that demanded compromise. I closed an 8-figure funding round enough to scale without losing control. We leased a real production facility, invested in waste-reducing equipment, built an actual team: designers, operations, quality control. We laid a foundation that could hold weight. Seasonal drops sold out in days. Annual revenue climbed into 8 figures. Press followed: industry features, podcasts, interviews about conscious consumerism. I kept my profile low, still drove the same old car, still wore our own samples to meetings. Visits home became rare. And when I did go back, nothing changed. Mom would ask if I was still doing okay with that sewing thing, then immediately pivot to Spencer: what he needed next, what problem needed fixing. Dad nodded along out of habit. I kept my answers short. Things were fine, growing steadily. They assumed I was barely getting by. I let them. Living modestly wasn't difficult. The penthouse I eventually bought overlooking the harbor stayed almost empty. A few plants I struggled to keep alive, books stacked on the floor. Money flowed back into the company, into people, into systems built to last. By 26, Evergreen Threads had warehouses running at full capacity, partnerships with major retailers, customers across the country choosing us over fast fashion giants. And still, in that quiet house outside Baltimore, I remained the daughter with her small side project. And they had no idea how close the truth was to crashing straight into them. While I was quietly turning my idea into something real, Spencer's path started hitting wall after wall. His first big move after college was a delivery app startup aimed at campus food runs. He talked it up for months: how it would crush the competition, how investors were already circling. Mom and Dad handed over $100,000 without blinking, money they'd been saving for retirement. Spencer rented fancy co-working space, hired 2 friends, threw launch parties. 6 months later, the app was dead. Users never showed up. Costs bled out, and he shut it down. Came home with excuses about timing and market saturation. Mom hugged him, told him it wasn't his fault, that geniuses always face setbacks first. Dad refinanced the house to clear the credit cards Spencer had maxed out for business expenses. They never mentioned the money again, just acted like it was normal to bail him out. Less than a year later, he was back with the next sure thing: an online sports gear store with curated drops. Same pattern. More cash from home, more hype. This time he dragged Indy into it too. She lent him $25,000 because Mom begged her to support family. The site launched sat empty, racked up warehouse fees and ad spend. Returns ate whatever profit trickled in. Spencer started missing supplier payments. Creditors called the house. Dad took a second mortgage to keep the lights on a little longer. When it finally collapsed, Spencer walked away, shrugging already, talking about the next pivot. By then, he was bouncing between part-time jobs, retail bartending, whatever paid rent. He'd show up late, argue with managers, quit when it got hard. Every time he lost another gig, Mom would call me, almost in tears. "Your brother's having a rough patch. He just needs one win to get his confidence back." Dad sent extra transfers from their dwindling savings so Spencer could focus on building something new. At family dinners, the few I still attended, the script never changed. Spencer dominated the table, half-finished stories about almost deals and people who'd screwed him over. Mom hung on every word, promising she'd help however she could with the next idea. Dad nodded, wrote another check under the table. Indy, now married and watching her own loan disappear, still got pulled in for moral support whenever Mom needed backup to defend him. No one ever asked what I was doing day to day. If my business came up at all, Spencer smirked and called it cute. Mom brushed it off as a side gig that paid the bills. They had no clue the company was pulling 8-figure revenue, that my team had grown to dozens, that journalists were requesting interviews. To them, I was still the quiet one scraping by, while Spencer remained the son with unrealized potential they refused to stop betting on. Every bailout, every excuse, every dollar they poured into his black hole just widened the gap between the life they thought he deserved and the one he actually lived. And the bigger that gap grew, the clearer it became who they'd really lost the bet on years ago. The deal that finally felt right came from a huge retail conglomerate that believed in the same mission. They approached quietly, no flashy pitches, just solid numbers, and a clear plan to expand reach while keeping the core values intact. Negotiations dragged for months, conference calls at odd hours, red-lined contracts flying back and forth, lawyers dissecting every clause. The final offer landed at $260 million for the majority stake. I kept a smaller portion to stay involved, but the bulk was theirs. When the papers were signed, I sat in the closing room long after everyone left, staring at the harbor view, feeling nothing like triumph. More like numbness. After taxes, after generous bonuses for the team that had grinded with me from the start, after setting aside reserves for future projects, I walked away with roughly $100 million in my accounts. More money than anyone in my family could imagine. More than they'd ever thought possible for the daughter they wrote off. I didn't call home, didn't post anything, just scheduled the first therapy appointment I'd ever made. The office was small, neutral colors, a box of tissues on the side table. I didn't touch it first. But once I started talking, it poured out the birthdays that felt like afterthoughts. The constant message that I wasn't worth the investment, the way every achievement got dismissed, while Spencer's failures got endless second chances. The therapist listened without judgment, asked quiet questions that cracked open things I'd buried deep. Week after week, I unpacked the weight of being the child who was told she'd be fine, then left to prove it alone. Healing wasn't linear. Some sessions left me drained, others strangely lighter. I started seeing how their choices had shaped me, but also how I'd turned that shape into something unbreakable. The money sat in the background, useful, but not the point. What I needed was clarity on whether anything in that house had changed, or if I'd simply outgrown the need for it to. Spencer's 31st birthday rolled around on the calendar. Mom texted weeks ahead, more enthusiastic than usual. "We'd love to have you. It'll be just like old times, everyone together." The heart emoji at the end felt forced. I stared at the message longer than I should have. My therapist called it an experiment, not a reunion. Go if I wanted data, not approval. Observe how it felt now from the outside looking in. No expectations, no obligation to fix anything. Just see what was real. I booked a flight back to Baltimore, reserved a hotel room downtown, Clean, anonymous a door that locked on my terms. No staying in the old bedroom with its faded posters and narrow bed. This time, I wanted distance I could control. Driving to the house that afternoon, the neighborhood looked smaller than memory. Same cracked sidewalks, same overgrown lawns. Their place still had the familiar blue siding, though the paint was peeling more now. I parked the rental, grabbed the small gift I'd picked up out of habit more than feeling, and walked up the steps. It wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. It was about finally seeing up close what happened when the invisible daughter stepped fully into the light they never bothered to shine on her. The backyard was lively when I arrived with a small gift in hand. The grill was still smoking music, playing low, people clustered around tables loaded with food. Spencer was in the center, beer in one hand, gesturing wildly about his newest online venture, some drop-shipping scheme he swore would explode. Mom hovered close, laughing at every joke, refilling plates for his friends. Dad stood nearby, nodding proudly, slapping backs like Spencer was already a success. Indy sat at the end of a picnic table, smiling along but quieter than usual. I slipped into a chair on the edge, said quick hellos. No one asked about my flight or where I was staying. Conversation flowed right back to Spencer, how close he was to landing investors this time, how the last failures were just bad luck. Mom finally turned to me, casual as ever. So Rowan still tinkering with that clothing line. Paying the bills. Okay, Spencer overheard, and grinned that old condescending grin. Come on, Mom, it's her little side thing. Cute, right? How's the sewing going? Sold enough hoodies to cover rent this month? A few of his friends chuckled. Indy shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. I set my fork down. The noise around us kept going for a beat. Then I looked straight at Spencer and said calm and clear. Actually, I just sold the majority shares in Evergreen Threads. He snorted. Sure. That worthless little operation. What did you get? A couple grand to buy new fabric? Mom leaned in, smirking. Be nice, Spencer. But really, honey, how much enough for a vacation? I held his gaze. $260 million. The backyard went dead silent. Dad's face drained of color. He was mid-sip on his beer and his hand trembled so violently he had to grip the table edge to keep from staggering, knees buckling like the ground had shifted under him. Spencer's smirk vanished. His mouth dropped open, face turning ghostly pale, eyes wide with pure shock. Mom's paper plate slipped from her fingers, food scattering across the grass as she stared, frozen. Indy gasped audibly, hand over her mouth. No one moved. The music felt suddenly too loud. Spencer recovered, first voice cracking. You're lying. No way some online shirt shop sold for that. I pulled out my phone, opened the banking app to the transfer confirmation, turned the screen toward them. The number stared back, commas and zeros, undeniable. Mom whispered, "This can't be real." Dad just gripped the table harder, breathing shallow. Spencer slammed his beer down. Bullshit. You got lucky or something. Doesn't make you better than us. That's when the words I'd held back for years came out sharp and steady. Lucky Luck didn't build a company from a dorm room while working overnight shifts. Luck didn't turn down $80 million because it would have destroyed what I created. Luck didn't grind alone because no one here ever invested a dime in me. I looked at Mom. You flew across the country to decorate his dorm but couldn't drive an hour for my graduation. At Dad. You refinanced the house twice to cover his failures, but never once asked if I needed help with tuition. At Spencer, you burned through hundreds of thousands they gave you, failed over and over, and they still called you the one with potential. Me, I was always fine, meaning I didn't matter enough to try for. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We did our best. We supported you. No. You supported him. Every chance, every safety net, every excuse. You told me I'd be fine, then acted like that meant you were off the hook. I built everything without a single one of those things. Spencer shouted, voice rising. So what? Now you think money makes you superior? You're still the same weird kid who hid in her room. I stood slowly. Money doesn't make me superior. It just proves you bet everything on the wrong child. And now you're staring at what happens when the one you ignored wins anyway. Mom reached out, voice breaking. Rowan, wait. We're family? Maybe you could help Spencer get started properly this time. A real investment. The words hung there raw and desperate. I picked up my bag. I did stick with family for years. You just never noticed. The silence was total as I walked across the grass past stunned faces out to my car. No one called after me. Driving away from that house that night felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for decades. I drove straight to the hotel, kicked off my shoes, and sat in the dark watching city lights across the water. My phone stayed silent for hours. Then the messages started. First came the texts from Mom, long rambling paragraphs about misunderstandings, how I'd humiliated Spencer in front of his friends, how family should forgive. Then accusations. That I'd planned it, that I was cruel for springing it on them. Spencer chimed in next, calling me selfish, arrogant, saying I'd turn my back on the people who raised me. I read them once, then turned the phone face down. 2 weeks later, an official letter arrived at my office from a lawyer representing both my parents and Spencer. They were demanding $3 million as compensation for years of housing, food, education, emotional support. Reading it felt almost comical, like pricing a childhood they'd barely participated in. My attorney responded the same week. A short, ice-cold letter declining the claim, attaching a full financial breakdown, every tuition payment for Spencer's private schools, every check written for his failed ventures, every refinance on the house to cover his debts. And next to my name, nothing but zeros. The closing line stated that any further pursuit would force those records into public court filings. The next message from Mom was frantic. We're dropping it. Please, let's just talk. No apology, just damage control. Spencer's spiral accelerated after that. The birthday meltdown had spread. Someone at the party recorded his shouting connected dots to online rants he'd posted trashing his ungrateful sister. The clip hit local groups, then his employer saw it. He lost the retail management job he'd barely held onto. Bills piled up faster than he could ignore them. Creditors closed in on old loans Mom and Dad had co-signed. The house went next. Years of refinancing to bail him out finally caught up. Foreclosure notice taped to the door, auction scheduled. They sold what they could, moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. Mom's health started slipping, stress, doctors said. Relatives who'd watched the favoritism for decades quietly distanced themselves. I never responded to the calls, the voicemails, the emails. Blocked numbers when they switched phones. Changed my address on file. Cut the cord completely. No dramatic announcement, just silence. Life on my side moved forward. I started a new venture focused on mental health tools for underserved communities. Mentored young women who messaged me after hearing parts of the story. The ones who grew up feeling like afterthoughts in their own families. Gave them the advice I wish someone had given me: build your own table if they won't make room at theirs. I donated quietly to causes supporting kids from unbalanced homes, traveled. Surround myself with people who show up because they choose to not, because blood forces it. Sometimes late at night I think about that backyard, the dropped plate, the stunned faces. Not with anger anymore, more like distance. They gambled everything on one child and lost the other without realizing it until too late. Here's what I know now and what I hope sticks with you. If you've ever been the overlooked one, your worth isn't measured by how much your family invests in you, how loudly they cheer, or whether they ever admit they were wrong. Favoritism doesn't just hurt the kid who gets ignored. It cripples the one who gets worshipped too, stripping away any reason to stand on their own. I lost the illusion of a family that would one day see me. In exchange, I gained a life I actually chose. And if you're still waiting for them to wake up and notice you, stop. Start building the proof they'll never be able to ignore. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't destruction. It's simply becoming someone they no longer have the power to hurt.